I'd like to welcome the moderator to come on screen and start the session.
Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome back to those of you who've been with us since this morning. My name is McDonald Gayle, and I'm the Conservation Finance Program Manager for the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And welcome to our session 3, which has 2 parts to it. One where we will be having a discussion on sustainable finance mechanisms, and the wrap up for our first day of this Caribbean Conservation Finance Congress. I begin by acknowledging our organizers. You heard already from James Elmore and Island Innovation, and to the St. Lucia National Conservation Fund, who are our co-hosts. And I encourage you all to read more on the SLUNCF and visit them and learn more about their work tomorrow at their site, their field trip, which will be very exciting. For this afternoon session, just to give you, for those who haven't been with us, a rundown of the logistical aspects. The speakers are panelists. As James already said, please make your messages for the chat as panelists and attendees so that we can all see your messages. Please separate your questions, the ones that you want the panelists to see, in the question and answer box so that we can find them easily and be able to respond to them as we go through this session. And we will go straight into our first session. Please continue to add your information in the chat box as to where you're from. Finally, I will add that there is interpretation. If you look down at the bottom bar, you will see interpretation for both French and Spanish. We welcome our Spanish and French speakers to click the tab and log in there for further information. And let me make a point of thanking as well the interpreters who have to deal with normally very fast speaking people like myself who in our native languages. So we are going to jump straight into today's session. The session is entitled Building Sustainable Finance Mechanisms for the Marine Environment. The main objective of this session is to showcase key ingredients for the establishment and implementation of finance mechanisms for marine managed areas, including protected areas, but also wider. And what we've thought about doing for this panel is to have a conversation that really discusses with some of the people who have had experience with conservation finance, what might work and what in some cases may not work for finance mechanisms. So with that, I will introduce the panel, and then I will speak a little more about CBF experience in terms of marine mechanisms and finance mechanisms, and then I will ask each of our panelists to tell you a little bit more about their work and how it's relevant and what we can learn from them as to for this, what I've been calling this cookbook that works for finance mechanisms and successful finance mechanisms. So very quickly, I will tell you a little bit more about the work that we've been doing. I am working with the Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture. It's currently comprised of 11 legal entities in the countries around the Caribbean, including all of the countries of the Insular Caribbean, or working with all of the countries, independent countries of the Insular Caribbean. And it's been established and now operational, supporting a range of coastal and marine priorities throughout the region. It's a 2-tiered financial architecture, and that's not too bad. I was looking at some of the global climate finance architecture the other day, and it's very complex. So I regret not showing ours because I thought it was looking very crowded, and then I saw the climate change one and said we could have shown ours. But the finance architecture for Caribbean has a 2-tiered approach. The first is the Regional Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which currently now has approximately US $130 million under management, with special funds dedicated to biodiversity conservation and protected areas. as well as ecosystem-based adaptation. And in the near future, we will be adding a component on circular economy, as you have heard before. In addition to those, we work with a set of independent national conservation trust funds, a term that you've heard many times today, and you will continue to hear throughout this Congress. These funds are managed by a multidisciplinary board of directors comprised of government, private sector, and non-governmental members. Together, the architecture has proved to be an important platform for public, private, and multi-sectoral dialogue. Since 2016, we've been having fora such as these, where we bring together diverse stakeholder groups to address issues, transboundary issues, regional, coastal, and marine issues, and other sustainable development challenges. Looking ahead, the architecture is envisioned to become a key regional resource mobilization mechanism to support the Caribbean countries in achieving new targets that are, of course, currently being negotiated. For example, there's a growing consensus and dialogue on what happens post-2020, post-CCI, and towards 2030. For the architecture to achieve its goals, the conservation trust funds and the national conservation trust funds in particular require support as we evolve and mature into consolidated fund managers and grant makers for conservation throughout the region. It is critical that this work is advanced to create the fully autonomous and sustainable national and regional organizations that we want to see. In the past 20 years, environmental trust funds around the world have pioneered the creation and management of a wide variety of innovative finance mechanisms, many of which target and involve the private sector in financing and promoting conservation outcomes. While several national conservation trusts in the regions have made progress, there's more work to be done. And we get together today to discuss some of the successes, some of the work that's been done with the National Conservation Trust Funds and the Caribbean architecture, as well as to hear more about opportunities and ideas that we can fold out and unfold in the coming years. So with that, I would like to introduce my panel with me very quickly, and then I will move to our first speaker. The panel with me today is another Karen Panton, who is the Executive Director of the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund. And we also have with us Katy Mathias, who is with the World Conservation Society, and they will all tell you more. There's more on their website, on their information, and they will tell you more when they speak. And finally, Dr. Camille David, who is with GIZ based in St. Lucia. So we're going to go straight into the discussions, and I'm going to welcome to the virtual mic Karen Panton to tell us more about the work and the effort so far of the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund. Karen?
Karen, and good afternoon to all. What a pleasure to be here at the invitation of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund to participate in this first Caribbean Conservation Finance Congress. We commend you for your foresight and agree that this is an ideal time to discuss and explore sustainable financing for conservation and development. BPAF was developed or established in 2014 to secure sustainable finance for the management of protected areas and, among other things, climate resilience, carbon sinks, fresh water, and threatened ecosystems. In 2017, following a study commissioned by the Nature Conservancies, 8 revenue options were distilled and offered as potential financial mechanisms for BPAF, and we've displayed them there for you to see. I'm going a little faster than my slides, but there are, yes, thank you so much. So 8 potential financial mechanisms involving cruise passenger taxes, opt-in and opt-out contributions, contributions from heads of agreement, among other things. The board settled on 2 of the low-hanging fruits, and if we can move to slide 2, because plans that were disrupted for some of those initial mechanisms due in part to Hurricane Dorian. Recently, we partnered with the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection to receive fees prescribed under the new Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Act of 2021. We can move over. We've also finalized an MOU with the Bahamas Customs Department on a new and vital venture, voluntary opt-in contributions across the department's Click to Clear platform. The platform will improve BPAF's access to residents, tourists, and foreign companies for donations to support grant-making programs. We also recently launched, what is hopefully for the first time, in preparation for a number of others, an electronic fundraising campaign for crucial national and coastal protection and restoration. And depending on the success of the campaign, we will follow through with 2 others for corals and seagrasses in the coming years. What are the lessons that we've learned over the years? Number 1, make investments in marketing and awareness. And sometimes the small organizations like conservation trust funds, these investments can be extremely painful, very difficult, but investing in marketing and awareness highlights our strengths, especially as funds develop on international best practices for conservation trust funds. And these best practices, of course, require good governance, accountability, transparency, and effective operations. Secondly, address how we differ from yet support other conservation organizations. I could say that many of us are so young, we're so small, we're so, rather incapacitated across the Caribbean, but it's important to highlight our role as grant makers, which alleviated, in our case, some confusion around the role versus protected area managers. The second point, the second lesson I'd like to say we learned is plan to diversify. Stay flexible and nimble to respond to change. Prior to Hurricane Dorian in 2019, we were developing final terms with a major private concern that was subsequently shelved. We had to quickly shift into another mode to get potential new streams. So consider a mix of sources and a mix of long-term, short-term options to avoid the risk associated with a non-diversified streams. Third, recruit board members based on the specific needs of the organization. So BPAF has a diverse board led by our wonderful chair, Kelly Boswick-Tooth. And our board members have been key in the establishment of the mechanisms now at play. Making introductions, opening doors, keeping doors open. In small organizations like BPAF, my board has brought the extra capacity and technical experience and expertise that otherwise would have made our advances very, very difficult. Fourth, we'd like to suggest be deliberate, be relentless as it relates to partnership development and engagement. And our current mechanism with the Department of Environmental Planning arose because of those organic relationships that we created along the way and we pursued. Fifth, and perhaps the last, be patient. Securing a mechanism can take time. So again, as you're looking for those long-term sources of funds, also secure additional short-term finances or grants to support your current needs. I don't think we can say that enough. I want to thank you, Karen, for allowing us to share those mechanisms that are working for us, and also to talk a little bit about the lessons learned. And before I leave, we have developed as part of our mangroves campaign a very short 1-minute video talking about the importance of mangroves and how Bahamians and visitors alike and those who love us can share in the support of this critical defense for island nations. So I'd like to just ask organizers to run that video at this time. Thank you.
What do defensive linemen, speed bumps, and the corners of coffee tables all have in common with mangroves? They all stand in the way of fast-moving and potentially destructive forces. Believe it or not, mangroves are not only essential to our ecosystem, they are also the first line of defense against the winds and surges of hurricanes. They help to protect our property, our economy, and our very lives. The Bahamas Protected Areas Fund is committed to protecting Bahamian mangroves, and we're making it easy for you to do the same. Link up to protect the mangroves by raising funds to plant and preserve our country's most important natural defenses. Just $12 plants a single mangrove tree, while $25,000 plants an acre. Every contribution counts. Help defend the Bahamas for this generation and the next. Visit bahamasprotected.com/linkup to learn how you, your family, or your organization can link up to protect the mangroves.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and of course for that finance mechanism on display and in full force. I will ask Karen to make sure and put the link for the campaign, the Link Up campaign, in the chat so that everybody can see it. And with no further ado, I welcome Katy Mathias to present to us now and to introduce herself. Thank you, Katy.
Karen, thank you so much, and thank you to the organizers. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited for this first Conservation Finance Congress in the Caribbean. As Karen Panton said, it's a wonderful thing that we're able to do this. So I want to check first and find out, is my screen sharing correctly?
Katy, could you put it in full screen mode?
Yes. Now we're okay?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry about the technical glitch. So let me just quickly share a little bit about the two organizations that I work with. One is the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is a global NGO that's focused on conserving wildlife and wild places throughout the world. We work in over 60 countries and work with protected area managers and governments to conserve wildlife. And the Conservation Finance Alliance, which I will put a link to in the chat when I finish speaking. I encourage everyone who's not currently a member to join us, is a global membership organization of conservation finance experts and practitioners around the world who are working on key issues of sustainable finance and for conservation of biodiversity. So I was asked to speak about some of the key ingredients for sustainable finance mechanisms. The Conservation Finance Alliance a few years ago published a framework of conservation finance. I think David Myers, who's one of the lead authors of this, is on the webinar right now. So part of this framework was to lay out some of the new definition of conservation finance, or a leading definition of conservation finance, as well as to establish a taxonomy of conservation finance mechanisms and to group them within categories that really capture the range of mechanisms that are in use. The definition of conservation finance, as the Conservation Finance Alliance uses it, is mechanisms and strategies that generate, manage, and deploy financial resources and align incentives to achieve nature conservation outcomes. And one of the things that I think key about that is that it reframes what may have been sort of many of the assumptions or the operating premises around conservation finance for a long time, that it was about generating more money. And certainly generating more money or more revenue, bringing more capital to conservation is critical. And I think there is probably not a protected area manager or conservation practitioner out there who is claiming that they have enough money to do the work that they need to do. But an important element is recognizing that there are other drivers and other roles that conservation finance can play that also ensure that the resources that are needed for conservation are available. So this diagram in the lower right of my screen illustrates some of those opportunities. So there are both conservation finance mechanisms that focus on money, but also those that focus on behavior and driving behavior change. So it can focus, of course, on increasing revenue, and I think that's obviously, again, where most of us focus a lot of our thinking. But it's important to note that there are also mechanisms that focus on decreasing the cost of conservation and reducing threats on protected areas. At the same time, we also have mechanisms that focus on behavior change, and those can be either discouraging harmful actions or providing incentives to encourage positive actions. And so thinking about the interplay of those drivers in developing, whether it's a new tax, creating a conservation trust fund, looking at public-private partnerships around protected area management, most of those involve not just one of these quadrants, but more than one. And so fully really understanding and and thinking holistically about those drivers is important. So a few of the key ingredients that I would highlight as important for conservation finance mechanisms. One of the keys is planning. And I think very often we see that there's a push to get things done. There's a push to move quickly. And also a tendency to think of business planning as something that happens in the private sector or in the, in entrepreneurial startups, but it's equally important, if not more important, in the conservation finance space as well, to put together a business plan up front to really understand the interplay of the drivers that I spoke about on the previous slide, and to be able to articulate to potential donors, potential sources of revenue, the compelling business case for the financing mechanism that you're putting together or seeking to implement. Part of that planning is a truly holistic analysis of a number of factors, understanding the costs and benefits of the mechanism, really understanding drivers of economic behavior and of course the underlying ecological science as well. Knowing the motivations and the issues of both the payers and the beneficiaries within a financing mechanism, and understanding the influencers and the decision makers, whether they're direct participants in the mechanism, they are often critical to the success. And those influencers could be within government, could be within the private sector, could be the local communities that are within and adjacent to protected areas and MPAs. And lastly, Karen mentioned this, and I can't stress it enough, is the importance of diversification. Over-reliance on any source or any particular mechanism can be a recipe for disaster. And what we've certainly seen over the last 15 to 18 months with the effect of COVID is that protected areas that were solely reliant on tourism revenue have suffered mightily, and those that had diversified revenue streams and were able to pivot have fared, have been more able to be resilient throughout this pandemic period. So with that, thank you, and I will turn it back to Karen.
Thank you very much, Katy. And we'll talk more, but I do see the recipe coming together that I always call it of what makes up a good finance mechanism. So let's hear from Dr. Camille David, who is with GIZ based in St. Lucia. He is a marine expert, and I will let him tell you more. You heard some about his program for those who were in the last session and the work that they're doing now, but I hand over to Camille to give you more details before our panel discussion.
Thank you, Karen. And I think it's a pleasure to be part of this panel. We are working on establishing a sustainable marine financing program in 4 islands, which we hope will upscale to the different islands, really improve conservation financing to address a number of issues in the Eastern Caribbean. We recognize that the marine space in the Caribbean is one of the most valuable resources. The coastal ocean is a repository of natural capital and ecosystem services and potential sources of significant direct and indirect income. Effective management of marine protected areas provides for greater social and economic good. Sustainable marine financing provides the tools and means for MMAs or MPAs to effectively manage the marine space by providing access to secure, stable, and sufficient long-term financial resources for core management operations. Up until now, there has been a lack of strong financing systems and effective financing mechanisms for proper administration of marine protected areas in the Caribbean. Responsibilities for this is at least 2 levels. At the regional level, the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, is charged with improving the administration of management of marine protected areas. It is mandated to provide appropriate advice to its member states on how to set up and enable access to requisite financing systems and mechanisms to facilitate regional knowledge exchange. At the national level, responsibilities for management of MPAs, including financial management, lies with the management boards. They are NGOs that are directed by selected stakeholders, and obviously they are attached to various government procedures for securing financing for the MPAs. Cognizant of the fact that sound, consistent financing is a major foundation for sustainable management of marine protected areas, the GIZ implemented Sustainable Marine Financing Program aims to tackle the major barriers to sustainable financing and to improve access of MPAs through the National Conservation Trust funds to long-term secured financing. And along the way, I think we have identified a number of key steps that which will guide the process of establishing such mechanisms. And permit me to identify some of them as we move forward. I think number one, I think there's a need for changing the mindset that institutions or technical agencies like GIZ being perceived as donors to a shift where we become more facilitators and partners in the process. And I think the way we need to continue to do that is to empower the MPAs to take on more responsibilities. And I think the second point is to create a supportive environment for sustainable financing to flourish. We envision that the adoption of our regional voluntary guidelines that we are currently revising, which is a set of best management practices, will not only improve the management of the MPAs, but also the financial set up the financial support to enforce the mechanisms that we want to install. The process obviously involves adapting or developing the framework so that we can operationalize conservation financing. I think the third important step that we identify is that the work of the MPAs, we need to realign their goals for greater compatibility with the existing architecture that is currently being laid down by the CBF for the National Conservation Trust funds. This involves building solid partnerships with the National Conservation Trust funds, and in fact, capacity building programs and trainings to enable MPA management boards to meaningfully partake and improve their own access to when a call for proposal goes out. Another key step I think that is very, very important is a thorough analysis of what measures can work and what can't work. Identify the many barriers. I mean, there are many barriers at different levels, legal barriers, political, institutional barriers, sustainable marine financing, and so as to better prioritize strategies. And this involves taking a look at the financial resilience of the MPAs and to identify the right mix of financial strategies and how they can be managed to achieve financial independence for the various MPAs. And also to adopt and implement blended financing mechanisms for the marine protected areas. And that can be done with consultations at all levels. The blend of approaches must consider future costs of operating the MPA, future revenue projections, and assessing the funding gaps and how these gaps can be closed. And I think the final key step is to demonstrate to stakeholders that there is value in the process. I mean, if we can get the communities, the stakeholders to appreciate that MPAs are making meaningful contribution to the development of the resourcing of these communities, I think that is a powerful testimony and it creates greater traction on the ground to support marine sustainable financing. So with these key points, I think I will leave it up. I'm sure there's going to be very exciting discussions on how, as a program, and obviously with questions from the audience, how we could create better supporting and enabling environments for the implementation of sustainable marine financing. Back to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camille, and thank you to all the presenters. We are going to go into a discussion now on just some of the points that have been raised, and please keep your questions coming. There are two now in the Q&A box, and I encourage you to add any questions. Let me quickly figure out the technology and show you the architecture, which I did have one request for. And if I can't, I will come back to it. Okay, let's start the discussion and we will come back to it. So I'll ask the presenters to the panel to join me on screen. Sorry, I found the presentation. So very quickly, while everybody's joining, this is the Caribbean sustainable finance architecture that was mentioned. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but it does answer one of the questions that was asked, which was how does the funding reach to the local level and the regional level? And the idea is that the CBF, as I believe Karen Panton also mentioned, is much more than a grant-making institution. We are trying to create opportunities for financing throughout the Caribbean. And the funding that we have goes to climate change. It will soon also go to circular economy. And then it goes to projects on the ground regionally and locally, both directly as well as through our National Conservation Trust Fund, such as the Bahamas Trust Fund. I'm not going to spend much more time on this, but this is a document I will share, and we can discuss more in the question and answer segment. So back to our panel. Karen Panton, I'm looking to see you on screen, but let's first have a discussion on some of what I heard coming up already, but in the Caribbean specifically, small island developing states, various stages and of economic development. What are the key steps to consolidating a finance mechanism? And I'm going to ask Karen to start that answer and for Camille to follow up, and then Katy. You're muted, Karen.
Sorry, thank you, Karen. I'd say it depends. It depends on the complexity of the particular mechanism that is being pursued. And it also depends on the specific conditions, institutional framework, institution, the whole enabling environment in the particular country you're in. I'd like to just piggyback from what David said, that the National Conservation Trust Fund has to demonstrate value, though. It has to demonstrate that's bringing something to the table. It also has to demonstrate or create a level of trust, I'd say understanding, visibility, transparency, and this whole, the fact that, again, we're based on international best practices with good governance. We're organizations that are audited annually. These all create those ingredients for governments and stakeholders to put their trust and confidence in us. We need to be seen as viable and as capable, but I think equally so, I think you also need to have, Karen, institutions that understand what is at play. I find, and I'm not only speaking for Bahamas, that our ministries of finance perhaps need a better introduction to the work of conservationists and to what it is that we're trying to do. Again, this is not just about conservation, it's about conservation and sustainable development. There's much at stake. So again, I'm not sure that there's a specific step. I know for sure with a debt swap, there are certain steps. There's you need to go and evaluate it. There is writing terms and all these various conditions, bring in your legal opinion and positions and so forth. But certainly for something small, like what we did with the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection, it really was very organic. There was a discussion between me and the director of environmental planning, and we just talked about what made sense for the country. And so BPAF at that time made sense. And I'm just happy to say, because of that, there are other potential opportunities for us, particularly as it relates to climate finance. So I'm excited. I'm sure my other panelists may have more to add.
Yes. Camille, you want to add in as from the Caribbean and having had lots of experience on both sides of this table?
Yes, certainly. I mean, we, through previous intervention programs such as the CATS program, we had developed a series of management tools which some sort of created better support systems for the MPAs that we worked with. And we think that most of these are in place. Obviously, there is need for improving and creating a better understanding of this new mechanism that is through the National Conservation Trust Funds and removing the reliance from user fees. So that is a process, I think, which requires a number of steps. I think one is outlining the importance of a very supportive, enabling environment, as I mentioned. I think we had developed, for example, some sort of a regional guideline, which would enable at the CARICOM level and even at the MP level to really improve the management and standardize the operations of MPs. And we think that this is a better guarantee for supporting financing systems. So I think that is critical. And I'm hoping that once that is finally reviewed, we will get buy-in at the different political levels and at the various levels of management at the even at the MPs. I think going forward, we need to look at blended approaches. What can work, what can't work. And obviously, having the right mix of blended approaches creates in itself more guarantees and it creates more opportunities because this new setup is going to take time. There are new institutions that are involved. There's new relationships that need to be built. But at the same time, if we have a blend of approaches that could diversify and that could create the ready user incomes to really maintain the operations of the MPAs. So I think these are two important steps. And I'm also advocating for a more value in the whole process, getting local communities, the stakeholders, to create a wider support system for the implementation of sustainable financing mechanisms.
Thank you. And I think for Katy, I will ask you to give us the global perspective on that. There are other islands, other countries working on finance mechanisms and having success and having challenges as well. What do you see for the Caribbean? What do you think is next for the Caribbean sustainable finance architecture to succeed?
Good question. I was actually slightly going back a bit, but I'll pivot. I want to echo everything that Camille and Karen said, because I wholly agree with not just what they said for the Caribbean, but that applicability to global applicability, because those are the same considerations and the same issues that island nations, as well as really all countries facing marine and terrestrial conservation are dealing with. I would highlight, or I guess echo, the importance of stakeholder analysis and stakeholder consultation as being something you almost can't possibly do too much of. It can feel like you've done too much, but honestly, those channels of communication are continual and ongoing during the upfront planning process, during the implementation process, continual dialogue with, and that means not just talking at, but hearing from those who are engaged and affected by the financing mechanism as much as anything, because really good ideas come from those consultations. And so building support, but also continual improvement of whatever type of financing mechanism it is, again, whether it's a conservation trust fund or the creation of impact investing fund or public-private partnership, those dialogues are critical. And I was also going to add the importance, which makes me sound like a broken record, of the planning process to include the elements of a business plan, which are in a lot of ways a reflection of stakeholder consultation. So the business plan, which lays out the value proposition and the reason why the financing mechanism and financing approach aligns incentives across stakeholders and achieves conservation and biodiversity and even climate outcomes, because we're increasingly seeing the interrelationship between what we've all known is the interrelationship between biodiversity and climate are becoming more integrally involved from the financing side as well, not just from the ecological side. And at the same time, also being able to articulate in that business plan, what's the organizational structure, what's the financing model, what's the resource mobilization plan, so that stakeholders can rally around that document and use it as a shared reflection of where they're going with it. So hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you. And then I'll do one more question, but we actually have quite a few question and answers, so I might skip the rest of the questions. But just to pivot back, to use Katy's term, to oceans and the marine side of things. So finance mechanisms is one side. I think one of the other interesting discussions we have is how do we do finance mechanisms specifically for ocean results and for the blue economy side of things. How has that, well, maybe I'll flip it around now and ask Katy for some ideas and examples that are working now in the global scenario, but again, to hone it back home to the Caribbean, for Camille and Karen to really think about. Karen, you have a mangrove project going on. How do we make this relevant to the marine managed areas? One of the challenges we definitely had is focusing on the marine. We're small, but we still have the land space, and that normally does take the priority. So how do we get that focus on the marine aspects? So Katy, do you have some ideas on what's worked in other countries? And then let's talk a little bit quickly on the Caribbean scenario of what we need to do to make the marine managed areas priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to the over reliance or diversification question, one of the things that has certainly worked for marine protection has been tourism revenue, and the variety of ways that that revenue is captured from tourists, both in terms of entry fees and park entry fees, as well as country entry fees, variety of taxes and levies on hotels or cruise ships, and just the economic benefit that derives to local communities from conservation enterprises like diving businesses, tourboat businesses, snorkeling, where fishing is appropriate than tourist fishing. But I think what we've also seen, of course, is that in the unexpected scenario where tourism dried up overnight, then that over-reliance became a crisis quickly. Yeah. And so there are a number of really innovative and fascinating things that are going on. I think certainly the insurance tools that are being used in the Mesoamerican Reef are fascinating, and a lot of other parts of the world are looking at how those tools could be replicated in other parts of the world. Increasingly looking at partnerships with the private sector to understand how marine products can be sustainably harvested and sold where there can be price premiums because of conservation actions, to ensure that communities are getting a higher price for their products and being recognized for sustainable fishing practices. And certainly be valuable. And then, Karen mentioned debt swaps. It's going to be increasingly interesting. But debt solutions are going to become increasingly interesting as we move into the blue and green recovery coming out of the pandemic era. So I think all of those will be are being tested and explored in different parts of the world, and I think will be interesting to see how they evolve.
Thank you. Camille, you want to give us a little more of the ideas on the ocean side and the marine side from GIZ and your experience?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think the marine is one of the marine space, and the coastal ocean is one of the greatest assets that we have as small island states. Obviously, it has been providing a number of goods and services to sustain local communities. And I think the importance of exploring these resources sustainably is going to become a major part as we are impacted through climate and other externalities. And there are a number of ways in which we can increase the importance and elevate the importance of the ocean and the resources that comes from them. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to have a very inclusive, broad participatory engagements with the local communities who depend on these resources, get them all part and parcel of the process. I think that is one strategy, having good broad dialogues. I think developing some sort of guiding framework and promoting education and awareness on the importance of the ocean, not only for the immediate resources, but there is important links between, ocean resources and the diversity of these resources to human health. So if there's a wider appreciation, I think we can really promote and create more understanding of the role that the ocean can play. I think as well, there is need for at the policy level to get key players involved. And as we go about defining more specifically the whole blue economy concept and the whole ocean economy concepts, people who can really make decisions and take the appropriate decisions to guide the process forward, I think they can bring these issues to the forefront. And I think the whole idea of the ocean becoming more important can really take off from that point. I mean, this is some of the key ideas that comes to my head.
Thanks, Camille. And Karen, a little bit on your experience with.
Sure. I believe that conservation trust funds now need to embrace more of these really innovative financing opportunities, Karen, to look at the possibility of becoming incubators for small businesses to get those ideas that are out there and that are just sitting as ideas, and to see how we can find ways of monetizing some of these opportunities. Looking at impact financing, we were talking about public-private sector partnerships, and how do we bring money, and how do we bring the private sector into financing opportunity. Again, it's for development, it's for livelihoods, and working in that as well is trying to bring in more community involvement into these spaces. For example, here in the Bahamas, we are 95% water. And so efforts to restore our coast, efforts to restore mangroves and coral reefs and seagrasses and so forth are essential, but they're essential not merely for our protection from storms and so forth, but also because we've got communities who need to find alternate means of living, of providing for themselves. And we believe that these community-based efforts will provide them with the livelihoods through either ecotourism, ecotours, new and developing opportunities. Like we always tease, in one of our islands, there's a particular mud that's used in commercial beauty creams and so forth. There's beauty mask, sorry. And we always tease about going down to this island and gathering up a whole, bunch of this mud and selling it as Bahamian soap for face. But there are opportunities, and I think that if we come together, this whole coming together as conservation, as government, and as private sector interests, will do a whole lot in saving our biodiversity, in building resilience for climate change, and just totally exploring and bringing out new and emerging businesses under the blue economy. So I think there's a lot. It's exciting, and I think there are opportunities if we'll just get together, talk about them, and especially talk to the private sector about these opportunities.
Yeah, and one of the things that I heard, I think Karen and Katy saying is you have to, if you're talking to the private sector, you have to talk in their language, and the idea of what's valuable and why it's important for them to make this investment is something that we've been working on. The passion has to go with the business and make sense to both. Let me go straight to the question. There is a question in French and also in the chat on specifically on payment for ecosystem services, and your experience in terms of research successes, whether it's we've tried it in the region, and what your thinking is in terms of those as that opportunity in terms of finance mechanisms. Katy, do you want to start, and then maybe Karen?
Sure. Yeah, so certainly payment for ecosystem services programs have been successful. They tend to really rely heavily on a regulatory, an enabling condition that's a regulatory framework that can support the relationship between the providers and the buyers, in a sense. So so being able to create and enforce those contracts is important and can also be a challenge. So Costa Rica has been very successfl. Certainly the United States has some programs in place as well. We're increasingly seeing the emergence of water funds, and I think this is, effectively a form of a payment for ecosystem services approach where the consumers of water are compensating the providers of water for preserving the ecosystems that ensure that that water can be readily available throughout the watershed. So the sort of formally structured programs can have some legal challenges, but again, matching up the providers and the buyers is just a time-consuming process, and it requires.
And still sounding more land-based, yes. So water-based
and tend to sound more land-based,
right?
So yeah, so I am not familiar with marine and coastal-based programs, although when you look at the entire flow from watersheds all the way out to the coast, the connection is obviously plays out throughout that entire ecosystem. So, so there clearly is a relationship, and the key is just lining up stakeholders and ensuring that there's a recognition of value and a willingness to pay, and that's takes a lot of work, but I think that's where we're getting there slowly.
Thanks. Karen, have you tried any research on payment for ecosystems?
We don't have any clear payment for ecosystem services here that I'm aware of. But here's my thinking, Karen. This may be a little bit out of the box, but we do have a lot of subsidies that we provide to hotels and resorts, cruise lines, you name it. My thinking is this: we eliminate those subsidies, we develop a fund or redirect those funds to BPAF, of course, since we are in existence. And then, of course, we invite fishermen who provide a lot of pressure, put a lot of pressure on some of our marine protected areas. In those closed areas, in areas that are no-take zones, we provide them with the funds to do or go into alternate livelihoods. We provide them with the funds to become guides, or we provide them with the funds to become farmers, whatever it is. But using funds from savings we've made in one area to offset or to reduce the pressure on our biodiversity, on our fish stock, on whatever it may be in other areas. I also believe that adequately described and adequately presented to the public, there can also be some sort of voluntary payment system into, again, BPAF, so that we can provide assistance for communities as well and reduce some of the pressure on biodiversity. So those are just my thoughts on how that could potentially work here in the Bahamas.
Thank you, Karen. And Camille, one of the discussions I think Katy raised was on the use of user fees and access to user fees. And I know that the CATS program, and you have done a lot of work on that. what is the potential for that as a source of designing finance mechanisms, particularly marine protected area user fees?
Yes, certainly. I mean, one of the key outcomes of the current program that we're working on is to really improve user fee collection systems and improve the efficiencies, because we recognize that traditionally that it is one of the most significant components up to now on how most of the MPAs generate income for supporting and maintaining the operational costs. I think going forward, we still need to consider how we can really improve efficiencies, move to more digital payment systems probably, so that these user fees could really meet the operational costs. Because I mean, one of the key challenge in MPAs is that they are not able to finance the whole operations. I advocate for blended financing approaches. I think that is critical. And as I indicated, I think previously, implementing like the CBF architecture on with the through the NCTFs to create more long-term funding mechanisms for the MPAs. This must also be in conjunction with optimizing user fee collection systems. I think there is still potential, but for improving these systems. But I think it is highly subjected to, as we see with the COVID situation, and that can dwindle very quickly. And obviously, local MPAs will not have these resources. So moving forward, I think we have to find ways for improving capacities at the different levels to ensure that collection systems are up to date and we can capture at all ends.
And it's going back, as we've said before, back to the trust funds and the communities on the ground. One of the challenges I think we've had with user fees in some of our attempts so far. All right, the last question that I'm gonna throw out, and I'll ask each of you, I'll start with Katy and Karen. Are there examples of impact investment models for conservation financing that allow for private investment akin to crowdfunding? And I chose this so that Katy can give us some ideas, but also that Karen can tell us more about the video that we saw on her how did she reach to thinking that this was the way to go for an idea? Go ahead, Katy.
So that is a great question. And I did, by the way, this is not quite the answer to Brent's question, but I did put a link in the chat to the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which is a blended finance fund that will bring together private and public funds to support coral reef conservation. So I'd invite people to check that out. I would say there is a lot of potential to move towards sort of a crowdfunding private investment model. I have not seen that work yet. I've certainly seen conservation trust funds and other organizations using crowdfunding to raise money, but not on an equity, not on a return-based model. So effectively raising contributions. I think that we are increasingly seeing, I mean, what we know is that there is potentially an enormous amount of private funding that wants to invest in conservation, wants to invest in return generating projects. And the challenge that consistently needs to be tackled is how to structure projects in a way that makes them readily accessible to investors. And there are issues around scale, there are issues around transaction costs, there's issues around whether a conservation activity is truly a revenue and return generating venture, or whether it's something that we should fund because there's an intrinsic value and we should support it, but it's not a moneymaker. And certainly a lot of conservation is not a money-making opportunity, but quite a few opportunities exist for return generating projects and bringing together potential investors and conservation projects is, I think, probably one of the biggest things that's going to be happening for the next 5 to 10 years. And
Great.
the Global Fund for Coral Reef is one of the vehicles that's exploring what that will look like. To actually get to the approach where we really have sort of a crowd-funded individual investment model, I think is probably going to be the next generation of opportunity, where there's something that's actually saleable on sort of a retail basis.
Thank you. And Karen, if you'd wrap us up, tell us how you got to making sense of doing this mangrove campaign.
Sure. So after Dorian, as you know, we had a very destructive hurricane in 2019, absolutely devastated 2 islands, and also impacted the economy here in Nassau. So there were people displaced, there were people who were lost. And our thoughts were, how do we as an organization build this awareness and also generate the funds? And it cannot only be funds from one sector or from grants, but it has to be funds from all sectors and all parties. So we got together with this wonderful organization called Blue Orchid, thank you, and said, we want to do this amazing campaign that's going to be national, that's going to be supported by all of the stakeholders. And we do have the support of the Ministry of Tourism, we have the support of the Bahamas National Trust, and all these other wonderful organizations who are like, yes, let's do this. So we all got together with Blue Orchid and we said, the way to do this is to go to the public as a game. And so the Lincoln campaign is actually based on a game where it's like a peer-to-peer or pair fundraising sort of a program that allows organizations, hotels, groups, churches, whoever it may be, families, streets, communities to compete and see who rules that leaderboard. And basically what you're saying, who is showing the most interest in protection. The whole idea was, if you know that you're going to be impacted, if you have a house, for example, and you know that thieves are coming in because you don't have a fence or wall or cameras, you're going to invest in these things. And that was the idea, to say to the public sector, the private sector, families, students, hey, if we don't do this together for our nation, we are at risk each and every single time. And Hurricane Elsa passed, I think we were all, hands in the air, holding our breaths, wondering what's going to happen. So when you use, this type of program, it's different, it's new, unlike anything that's ever been in the Bahamas, to see how we can engage and say, all of us, from 2 cents to $2 to, $2,000, we are willing to receive it and apply it for conservation that's already on the ground. And we've got some organizations on the ground that are doing really great work in this area already. The Ministry of Works, again, the Bahamas National Trust, the Department of Environmental Planning, and so many other wonderful actors who are already working. But there are some gaps in the funding. Oh, I'm sorry, my chair telling me I forgot $2 million. So yes, if there are persons who want to make that $2 million contribution, I'm telling you, we need it. There are some really wonderful projects already with the Ministry of Works, Bahamas National Trust, DEP, and so on. But there are gaps in terms of the support that's necessary for capacity and for other things on the ground. So we're really excited, and we're believing that this campaign will do very, very well.
Well, congratulations on it. Just the fact that your chair can jump in right away and tell you what you've forgotten is a good start. And indeed, I think you mentioned one of the roles that the Conservation Trust Funds can play is to allow the implementation to happen on the ground and facilitate it with programs such as this. This is definitely what we are thinking of. And with that, I wrap up. We didn't get to all the questions. I acknowledge that. I particularly noted our questions from Moulay, who was in French mostly, so merci, and we will be in touch. And I also saw very interestingly some comments from Miami that Karen, who is online with me, and Danelia, who is in the crowd, already said that we need to follow up with the city of Miami, who has a resiliency officer, and very interesting discussion on architecture and the value of architecture to ocean building. So we will be following up. We will try our best to answer all the questions. Thank you all very much to our presenters, Katy Mathias, Camille David, and Karen Panton. We will thank you very, very much. We will segue straight into our last session, and we will begin the today's wrap up. So again, thank you to everybody. If you, in particular, since there's so many questions, please make sure to let us know if you don't have the contact information for any of our presenters or myself, and we can follow up directly one-to-one to answer the questions that you had on the matter. Let me just check that. Thank you all. Let me just check that I did not miss anything from my trustee support team. And I think I'm good. I have to. So again, we are going straight in. Thank you to those of you who stayed and given your input today. I think it's been a good day of discussion on a range of topics, and we are very happy that you were able to join us for the information. And I'm going to move straight into a discussion, the wrap up of today's session, as soon as I'm able to find it. Let's see if the technology will cooperate. Okay. Sorry, it's at a screen over here, so let's put it here so that I don't look like I'm looking off into space when I should be talking to you. So I think we've had a really good day. For those of you who were not with us for the entire day, we started the day with the opening session and a keynote speech from the CEO of Jeff, who made a presentation to us, and we also had the CEO of the Nature Conservancy, which you've heard is also a strong partner with the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And both spoke to the need and the value of the Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture and Caribbean Trust Funds. They spoke about the need for being able to recover from the aspect of the pandemic and what we've been doing. The CEO of Jeff in particular made an analogy of biodiversity with health, and the idea of green recovery and being diversified, that you don't ask how many hospitals you need, you just do what you need to do to make sure that you are able to provide for systems. And a very similar concept is the idea behind the moving forward with biodiversity conservation. So green recovery and diversified economies is a concept we've heard many times today, and that will be what will be essential to bringing back the sector, and in particular the tourism sector. So in the region, we are thinking about a new look at what tourism means, and you heard some more of that discussion in the group that we were just in. We also heard discussions on what the countries need to think about, that it is in countries' own self-interest to invest in natural resources, and to consider it one of their domestic resources, and public sector must invest as much as private sector and other funders are interested in the resource that is biodiversity. We also talked about the policy coherence that's needed, especially with a view to conflicting policies that may be harmful in the region. And we had a discussion on some of those. That's both in terms of the national and the regional frameworks. There was also a point made of making sure that the decisions that are being made are not only business-based and human-based, but have science, and that would be all aspects of science in considering what we're doing for development of finance mechanisms, that if we are considering removal or any kind of new development, that there is ecosystem valuation, so that there is a minimization of the loss of biodiversity in the work in the development that a country may be undertaking. And indeed, the example of Costa Rica was mentioned more than once. Innovative finance mechanisms, we've heard both now in this session, but also in the session before, about the value and the need for innovative finance mechanisms. And the Nature Conservancy in particular shared some of the work that they've been doing in first acknowledging the value of the natural resources that we might have, and then thinking through opportunities for insuring natural assets and debt refinancing, in cost and demonstrating the cost of damaging natural resources that needs to be passed on to taxpayers through some of the things we were talking about, such as payment for ecosystems. We also heard from Jeff that the idea of the co-finance process is that countries aim to demonstrate and prioritize their investment in their resources to be able to match and support what they're requesting of funders such as Jeff in terms of natural resource management and mobilization, so that it's not just a matter of please help us, but we are helping ourselves, therefore the contribution is needed. And it avoids the idea that the country is counterproductive in their actions, one of the topics that was discussed going forward. The idea of improved communication, again, something we mentioned here, but also at the higher level, the science has to be balanced with economic data so that ministers of finance, of fisheries, of tourism, and of environment have the full picture in front of them, and all types of decision makers are involved in the decision that needs to be made. So I will use Jamaica as the example. A decision on mining is involving a range of stakeholders, or a decision on environmental best practices or fisheries is involving the other sectors as well. So not just environment in the room when we're having a discussion on economic evaluation or valuation of natural resources, but the other users of the natural resources and the other ministries that have an impact on those sectors, those resources are involved. And there was also a discussion throughout on the value of conservation trust funds, which you've heard said again here, that there is great value in the role that the National Conservation Trust Funds and conservation trust funds in general can play in helping to bridge gaps from decision makers and ideas of these kinds to getting solutions and mechanisms on the ground that can create the funding that's required for implementers of conservation projects to be able to do the work and the great work that they're doing throughout the region. In terms of the discussions that we had on sustainable development goals, we had a discussion earlier today on the role of small island developing states and the Caribbean's role in that process. A number of the panelists spoke of their role in the unique perspective of small island developing states and the Caribbean in what needs to happen for SDGs and the fulfillment of SDGs and how best that can be financed. The targets of the SDGs have been transformed to commitments, but they still require some amount of development, capacity development. So funding, yes, but also the people, the time, and the technology that goes with that funding to be able to have results for the sustainable development goals at the global level. And we had some really good examples from our sister island, Hawaii, and some of the work that they are doing in the Aloha Plus Challenge, and much more information on that will be available from them. But they are making sure to localize and create an opportunity in using the SDGs. Their term was the SDGs are moonshot goals. So that's the big picture, the major vision. But how is that? How do we get to that vision? How do we reach to the moon? And it is about taking those first steps that are locally and culturally appropriate, involving stakeholders at all levels. And stakeholders are government-based, as well as private sector-based and civil society-based. So it was a very holistic approach, one we talk about a lot, but of course is a lot harder to get on the ground and get results from. And we heard examples from both Hawaii and Guam on this perspective. For the Caribbean, we had the acknowledgement that work has been continuing, that the Caribbean Challenge Initiative was a good start and a good place to begin some of that work. but that there is more to be done. And so now that the CCI has reached the 2020 target, what goes forward? We heard about the Blue Charter and the work that Ocean Unite is doing with other regional goals. And we need to think about, according to Safia, who was speaking on Ocean Unite, on behalf of Ocean Unite, overcoming unique gaps and challenges for the Caribbean region to become again, a space where we think about the vision going forward and moving ahead. We also had a very good presentation and a very down-to-earth presentation from the European Investment Bank about the work they're doing in the region and their possibilities and the Sustainable Ocean Fund. There was a very frank discussion on the value of the capacity in the region using the Caribbean technology, technical experts, and making sure that they are involved in the process and that those opportunities are being created. They mentioned some of the work that's already ongoing with marine parks and how we move from, let me read what's here, how to get a penny to drop for governments to prioritize the protection of marine areas, something that we again discussed today, that move towards what marine protected areas are about. And finally, there was a discussion on how we make sure that we're working most efficiently in the region. There are a number of us, there are a number of projects, there are a number of programs as we continually hear. And how do we make quality project interventions so that we are being smart in how we get results moving forward? And of course, just to wrap up in terms of the discussion, we just had the idea that there is work being done on finance mechanisms. There's still a lot of testing in terms of successful finance mechanisms and what works. I did see that there were questions on how successful have we been globally. There have been a number of successes. In the Caribbean, there have been a number of tests. And I think the question of success is one that comes with time, as I think we've said. Before. The planning is going into it, and some of the programs are successful. There are a number of marine protected area programs that are working both with private sector and public sector on ideas for marine protected area financing, and those will continue. But of course, we in the Caribbean are just working out the recipe, as I keep calling it, for sustainable finance mechanisms. And this is why forums such as these are great, for seeing other examples and hearing other theories that can work, and then making them our own in the Caribbean. And that is what we hope to continue to do to going forward. In terms of letting you know what's happening, just to make sure you join us again tomorrow for day 2, when we have, again, a number of interesting sessions. We will have a session on the Caribbean Blue Economy for diverse and sustainable livelihoods, continuing some of the discussions we've started today with a new panel and more interesting discussion. We will also have a specific session on climate finance for resilience. As you all know, we have an ecosystem-based adaptation facility under our climate change program, and that has been giving out grants and doing work on the ground in the Caribbean. And you will hear a little bit more about other such ideas and opportunities. And then finally, we will go to the field, because we've been in the hotel conference room too long. And we will begin by discussing successes of some of the field ventures that we have that have been undertaken in 4 areas. So we've all been talking in theory, and the question was asked even today about the successes. So we will talk about the reality of protected areas management. We will talk about climate change adaptations and the successes that we've had, especially on our EBA facility. We will talk about responsible tourism to 2 successful responsible tourism managers in the region. And we will also talk about sustainable fisheries and what makes sense. All 3 of those will be in our Voices from the Field discussion tomorrow afternoon. And then we will end the day by going with our hosts in St. Lucia on a field trip. So we're trying our best to make this as much of a conference, a regular conference as possible. So we will be going out to the field in St. Lucia and spending some time learning about our host country. with that, I'm going to pause and make sure that those who are guiding me are not telling me I need to do anything. And then I will hand over to James just to make sure. And thank you all again for being here today. Thanks as always to the interpreters who have been with us and have been working through the program. I want to particularly thank Ulrike Kraus and Ibrahim Abdullah. They are with the CBF team and were our rapporteurs today, and indeed will be our rapporteurs tomorrow. And I want to end by telling you about the expo that we will be having on the last day, the third day, with the National Conservation Trust Funds. You keep hearing about the 10 National Conservation Trust Funds that the CBF is working with, 11 including the CBF as part of the architecture. On Thursday, there will be an expo for seeing more and talking more specifically to these funds. You've met Danelia, for those of you who are in the earlier session, and Karen, who are two of our fund managers. And on Thursday, you will meet the rest. And one of the things that we asked the trust funds to do was to go ahead and make a brief video on the work that they're doing. And what we will do is throughout, kind of like the Oscars or Golden Globes, I don't know which one, we will show you just some of the snippets of the videos that they've done. And we're going to start with the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica and show you their video as we wind up today. Just because I have not been able to read all my various screens, I'm going to ask James if there is anything else. And if not, he can go straight into the NCTFJ video. We wish you all a good afternoon and see you tomorrow.
Since 2010, Jamaica has been working for the financial and operational strengthening of its protected areas system. Currently, there is a financial gap of about $2 million per year for protected areas to be effectively managed. NCTFJ was established in 2014 with the objective of filling this gap and providing sustainable funding for long-term protected areas management. NCTFJ board brings together the government, the civil society, and the private sector to mobilize resources from national and international partners. Join us in preserving, protecting, and promoting Jamaica's protected areas.